The harsh alarm pierced through Elena Vasquez's restless sleep at 5:30 a.m., just like every other morning at Crimson Peak Military Academy. But unlike every other morning, today she had fallen asleep at her desk again, surrounded by tactical manuals and combat theory textbooks. Her small frame was cramped from sleeping in the uncomfortable wooden chair, and her dark hair hung disheveled around her face. Elena's eyes shot open and immediately found the clock. Panic flooded through her as she realized she had only 30 minutes before morning formation. Not again. She couldn't be late again. She scrambled to get dressed, her movements frantic but practiced. This wasn't her first time cutting it close. As she rushed around her sparse dormitory room, the differences between her space and her roommates were stark. Where others displayed family photos and personal mementos, Elena's walls were bare, except for military manuals and tactical diagrams. No smiling faces looked down at her, no reminders of home and family support. At exactly 6 a.m., 4 companies of cadets stood in perfect formation in the academy's main courtyard. Crimson Peak Military Academy had been carved into the mountainside 2 centuries ago, its imposing stone walls and modern military installations creating a fortress that seemed to rise naturally from the rocky cliffs. This was where the nation's future military leaders were forged, where discipline was law and excellence was the only acceptable standard. Commandant Morrison surveyed his troops with the intensity of a battle-hardened veteran. His steel-gray eyes missed nothing, and his chest bore more medals than most officers collected in a lifetime. The morning mist swirled around the formation, as every cadet stood at rigid attention, their uniforms immaculate, their posture perfect. Every cadet except one. The main academy doors burst open, and Elena stumbled through, still adjusting her jacket as she ran. Every head in the formation turned to watch her desperate sprint across the courtyard. Whispers rippled through the ranks like wildfire. "There she goes again," muttered Cadet Hayes. "How is she still here?" whispered Cadet Torres. Elena's eyes shot open and immediately found the clock. Panic flooded through her as she realized she had only 30 minutes before morning formation. Not again. She couldn't be late again. She scrambled to get dressed, her movements frantic but practiced. This wasn't her first time cutting it close. As she rushed around her sparse dormitory room, the differences between her space and her roommates were stark. Where others displayed family photos and personal mementos, Elena's walls were bare, except for military manuals and tactical diagrams. No smiling faces looked down at her, no reminders of home and family support. At exactly 6 a.m., 4 companies of cadets stood in perfect formation in the academy's main courtyard. Crimson Peak Military Academy had been carved into the mountainside 2 centuries ago, its imposing stone walls and modern military installations creating a fortress that seemed to rise naturally from the rocky cliffs. This was where the nation's future military leaders were forged, where discipline was law and excellence was the only acceptable standard. Commandant Morrison surveyed his troops with the intensity of a battle-hardened veteran. His steel-gray eyes missed nothing, and his chest bore more medals than most officers collected in a lifetime. The morning mist swirled around the formation as every cadet stood at rigid attention, their uniforms immaculate, their posture perfect. Every cadet except one. The main academy doors burst open, and Elena stumbled through, still adjusting her jacket as she ran. Every head in the formation turned to watch her desperate sprint across the courtyard. Whispers rippled through the ranks like wildfire. "There she goes again," muttered Cadet Hayes. "How is she still here?" whispered Cadet Torres. Elena's eyes took her position at the back of Delta Company, breathing heavily and trying to look as composed as possible. Marcus Cole, the student body commander and epitome of military perfection, shook his head in disgust. With his square jaw, commanding presence, and flawless record, Elena's consistent failures were a personal affront to everything he represented. "Cadet Vasquez," Commandant Morrison's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. How generous of you to join us." Elena's cheeks burned red, but she kept her eyes forward. "No excuse, sir." "Indeed. Report to my office after formation." 30 minutes later, Elena stood rigidly at attention in the commandant's office. The room was a shrine to military history, with battle flags hanging from the walls and photographs of distinguished graduates lining every shelf. Commandant Morrison sat behind his massive oak desk, studying Elena with the same intensity he brought to everything else. "Cadet Vasquez, this is your 15th tardiness this semester," he began, his voice measured and cold. "Your academic scores hover barely above failing. Your physical fitness ratings are among the lowest in your class." Elena's jaw tightened, but she remained silent. "Tell me," Morrison continued, "why shouldn't I process your dismissal right now?" For a moment, Elena's carefully constructed walls threatened to crumble, but then that familiar fire blazed in her dark eyes, the same fire that had gotten her through 3 years of constant failure and humiliation. "Because I won't quit, sir. No matter what anyone thinks of me, no matter how many times I fail, I will not quit." Morrison studied her for a long moment. In 30 years of military service, he had seen thousands of cadets come and go. Most of the failures left quietly, accepting their limitations. But there was something different about Elena Vasquez, something that refused to be broken. "Your determination is noted," he said finally. "But determination without competence is merely stubbornness. You have 2 weeks until final evaluations. Fail those, and your determination won't matter." "Understood, sir." Dismissed. 2 hours later, Elena found herself on the Academy's sprawling tactical training field, surrounded by her fellow fourth-year cadets. The field covered several acres and was dotted with obstacle courses, combat simulators, and mock battlefield scenarios designed to test every aspect of military training.
Captain Reeves, a no-nonsense instructor with a reputation for breaking overconfident cadets, addressed the assembled students. "Today's exercise is simple," he announced. "Urban warfare scenario. Teams of 4. Your mission, secure the objective and extract the VIP. The team that completes the course fastest with the fewest casualties wins." Elena looked around as teams formed naturally. As usual, she found herself grouped with the Academy's other misfits and rejects. Cadet Williams, 19 and prone to panic attacks during high-stress situations. Cadet Chen, brilliant but physically weak, more comfortable with computers than combat. Cadet Rodriguez, aggressive and undisciplined, with more black marks on his record than anyone else in their class. Meanwhile, Marcus led the Academy's elite team, composed of the top-performing cadets. They huddled around their tactical map with the efficiency of seasoned professionals, their planning methodical and precise. Elena's team sat in awkward silence. Williams fidgeted nervously, Chen buried his nose in a technical manual, and Rodriguez cleaned his weapon with unnecessary aggression. "Okay," Elena began, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "Let's look at this logically. The objective building has 3 entry points." "Who made you team leader, Vasquez?" Rodriguez interrupted, his voice dripping with disdain. "Nobody, but someone has to step up or we're going to get slaughtered out there." Chen looked up from his manual. "She has a point," he said quietly. "The statistical probability of success without coordination is less than 12%. Williams looked like he was about to hyperventilate. "I don't think I can do this. What if I freeze up again?" Elena looked at her teammates, the Academy's unwanted, the ones nobody else chose. In their faces, she saw her own struggles reflected back at her. They were afraid, just like she was. They felt inadequate, just like she did, but they were what she had to work with. "Listen to me," she said, her voice growing stronger. "We're not the fastest, we're not the strongest, and we're definitely not the favorites. But we're what we've got, and sometimes that's enough." The urban warfare course was a maze of concrete structures designed to simulate a war-torn city. Smoke machines created a hazy, disorienting atmosphere, and the sound of simulated gunfire echoed throughout the complex. When Captain Reeves gave the signal to begin, Marcus's team moved like a well-oiled machine, advancing through the course with military precision. Elena's team stumbled almost immediately. Rodriguez charged ahead without waiting for the signal, triggering an ambush that killed 2 of their number according to the simulation parameters. Williams froze when the simulation rounds started flying, dropping his weapon and hyperventilating. Chen's brilliant tactical analysis meant nothing when he couldn't keep up physically with the demands of urban combat. "Rodriguez, fall back!" Elena shouted over her communications headset. "Williams, I need covering fire on that window." But her commands fell on deaf ears. Rodriguez was pinned down by his own recklessness, trapped behind a concrete barrier while simulated enemy fire rained down around him. Williams had completely shut down, and Chen was trying to help him, while bullets sparked off the walls around them. Elena made a decision that would define her character more than any test score ever could. She broke from cover, sprinting across 30 yards of open ground to reach Rodriguez's position. Simulation rounds sparked off the concrete around her feet, and the tactical computer registered multiple hits on her body armor. "Rodriguez, get back!" Rodriguez yelled as she slid into cover beside him. "Not without you," she replied, grabbing him by the vest and hauling him towards safety. They made it halfway before the simulation declared both of them critically wounded. The exercise was over for Team 4 before they had even reached the first objective. "Team 4, you have sustained critical casualties," the intercom announced with mechanical indifference. "Exercise terminated." Elena slumped against a concrete wall, breathing hard and fighting back tears of frustration. In the distance, they could hear Marcus's team successfully completing their mission with textbook precision. Another failure to add to her growing collection. The academy mess hall buzzed with conversation about the morning's exercise when lunchtime arrived. Elena sat alone at a corner table, picking at her food while trying to ignore the animated discussions happening around her.
"Did you see that breach?" Cadet Hayes was saying enthusiastically. "Textbook perfect! Marcus is definitely getting the Commandant's Award this year," Torres replied. Elena tried to make herself invisible, but her solitude was interrupted when Sarah Mitchell approached her table. Sarah was well respected among their class, academically gifted, and had no obvious reason to associate with the Academy's pariah. "Mind if I sit?" Sarah asked. Elena looked up, surprised. "It's a free country. Well, technically it's military property, but..." Sarah sat down with a slight smile. "You know, what you did out there today took guts. What I did was fail. Again. You went back for Rodriguez. Most people would have written him off." Elena stabbed at her food without looking up. Most people would have been smart enough not to let him get pinned down in the first place. Sarah studied Elena's face, seeing the pain that went deeper than just today's failure. "Why are you really here, Elena? And don't give me the standard academy answer about serving your country." Elena's fork paused halfway to her mouth. For a moment, her carefully constructed walls threatened to crumble completely. "My brother," she said finally. "He graduated from here 10 years ago. Lieutenant Miguel Vasquez, killed in action in Syria." "I'm sorry." "Everyone said he was the perfect soldier, brave, smart, everything I'm not." Elena's voice grew quieter. "When he died, my parents needed someone to blame. It was easier to blame the military than to accept that sometimes good people die for no reason." She set down her fork and looked directly at Sarah for the first time. "I came here to prove that his sacrifice meant something, that the ideals he died for are worth preserving. But every day I'm here, I prove the opposite." "Maybe you're looking at it wrong," Sarah said gently. "How so?" "Your brother was naturally gifted. You have to fight for every inch. Which one requires more courage?" Before Elena could respond, Marcus and his entourage approached their table. The mess hall gradually quieted as conversations died away, everyone sensing the potential for confrontation. "Vasquez, heard you had another stellar performance today." Elena stood slowly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Just practicing for my inevitable discharge, Cole. You know what I don't understand? Why you keep torturing yourself? You're never going to be officer material. You're a liability to everyone around you." "Are you done?" Elena asked, her voice deceptively calm. "Actually, no. I have a proposition for you." The mess hall was completely silent now. Every cadet in the room was watching, sensing that something significant was about to happen.
Marcus smiled with predatory confidence. The combat trials are next week. If you can beat me, just you and me, one-on-one simulation, I'll personally recommend you for honors. But when you lose, you voluntarily withdraw from the academy. And why would you risk your precious reputation on a bet with the worst cadet in school? Because there's no risk, Marcus replied with absolute certainty. You've never won a single combat exercise. Your tactical knowledge is book-learned theory with no practical application. And frankly, I'm tired of watching you drag down the reputation of this institution. Elena looked around the mess hall. Every face stared back at her with a mixture of pity and anticipation. These were her classmates, people she had trained alongside for 3 years, and not one of them believed she could win. Elena, don't, Sarah whispered urgently. But Elena's mind was already made up. The same fire that had kept her going through 3 years of failure was burning brighter than ever. You're on, Cole. The mess hall erupted in excited whispers and speculation. Marcus extended his hand with a smile that never reached his eyes. 1 week from today, the whole academy will witness the end of your military career. Elena shook his hand, her grip firm despite the tremor of fear running through her chest. We'll see about that. That night, Elena sat at her desk, surrounded by tactical manuals and combat theory texts. Her laptop screen displayed endless videos of military engagements and training exercises, bathing her face in blue light as dark circles formed under her eyes from too many sleepless nights. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a framed photograph she kept hidden from the world, her brother Miguel, in his dress uniform, proud smile beaming from under his officer's cap. Next to him stood a younger Elena, maybe 16, looking at him with pure admiration and love.
What would you do, Miguel? She whispered to the photograph. How do you beat someone who's better than you at everything? Her fingers traced the photograph's edges, worn smooth from years of handling and hidden tears. I'm trying to honor your memory, but I don't know how. I'm not you. I've never been you. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Elena quickly hid the photograph and opened the door to find Sarah standing in the hallway, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. Thought you might need this, Sarah said. It's past lights out. So is studying until 3 a.m., but that's never stopped you before. Sarah entered the room and handed Elena one of the cups. The coffee was strong and hot, exactly what Elena needed to get through another sleepless night of preparation. You know, I've been thinking about what Marcus said. About me being a liability? About you never winning a combat exercise. Sarah settled into Elena's roommate's empty chair. He's right, you know. You've never won. But you've never lost the way everyone else loses either. Elena frowned. I don't follow. Williams panics and shuts down. Rodriguez gets angry and makes mistakes. Chen overthinks everything until it's too late. But you? You keep fighting even when you know you're going to lose. You go back for people. You take risks to save your team, even when they don't deserve it. And that makes me what? A noble failure? It makes you a leader, just not the kind they teach about in the manuals. Elena sipped her coffee in thoughtful silence, considering Sarah's words. Marcus fights like he's playing chess, every move calculated, every outcome predetermined. But real combat isn't chess, it's chaos. And in chaos, someone who can adapt, who can make impossible decisions under pressure, who can inspire people to follow them into hell, that person wins. You think I can beat him? I think you can surprise him, and sometimes that's enough. Later that night, while most of the academy slept, Elena walked the perimeter paths that wound around the compound. She had obtained special permission for late-night training, though she never told anyone what that training actually entailed. These solitary walks helped her think, helped her plan, helped her remember why she was fighting. She stopped at a secluded overlook that provided a panoramic view of the surrounding valley. The mountains stretched endlessly in every direction, their peaks shrouded in darkness and mystery. This was her thinking place, where she came to wrestle with her doubts and fears. As she stood there, a movement in the valley below caught her eye. A brief flash of light, quickly extinguished. Then, another, farther to the east. Elena pulled out her field glasses and scanned the terrain carefully. Nothing, just darkness and shadows playing tricks on tired eyes.
Elena lowered the glasses, frowning. It could have been anything: wildlife, hikers, even vehicle headlights from the distant highway. But something about the pattern of the lights bothered her. They had seemed too regular, too coordinated to be random. She made a mental note to mention it to the duty officer in the morning, then continued her patrol. As she walked away, she didn't notice the red dot of a laser rangefinder briefly illuminating her position from somewhere in the valley below. Back in her room at 2 a.m., Elena returned to her studies with the strange lights already forgotten in favor of more immediate concerns. She spread out tactical maps and combat scenarios across her desk, searching desperately for any edge she could find against Marcus. Her laptop screen showed a paused video of Marcus's last combat exercise, a flawless demonstration of combined arms tactics that had earned him the highest score in Academy history. Elena played the video in slow motion, analyzing every decision, every movement, looking for weaknesses that might not even exist. Marcus was indeed brilliant. His tactical awareness was exceptional, his execution flawless, his leadership inspiring. But as Elena watched the video again and again, she began to notice something else. Marcus always followed doctrine. His moves were textbook perfect because they literally came from the textbook. He never improvised, never took unexpected risks, never deviated from established protocols. He was predictable in his very perfection. "You're predictable, aren't you?" Elena murmured to herself, studying the screen. Brilliant, but predictable. A desperate plan began to form in Elena's mind. It was probably doomed to failure, likely to end in humiliation, but it was a chance. Sometimes that's all a person gets. One chance to prove they belong. One opportunity to show that heart can triumph over talent.
Over the following days, Elena threw herself into preparation with renewed intensity. She practiced combat scenarios in the simulation pods, deliberately choosing chaotic, unpredictable situations that forced her to adapt and improvise. She studied not just military tactics, but unconventional warfare, insurgency strategies, anything that might give her an edge against superior forces. She pushed her body beyond its limits during physical training. Her times improved only marginally, but her endurance and pain tolerance increased dramatically. Most importantly, she observed Marcus whenever possible, learning his patterns, his preferences, his blind spots. Meanwhile, word of the bet spread throughout the academy like wildfire. Betting pools formed among the cadets, with odds heavily favoring Marcus. Some faculty members expressed concern about the arrangement, but Commandant Morrison allowed it to proceed, seeing it as a learning opportunity for all involved. 3 days before the challenge, Elena sat in the library's archives section, poring over historical accounts of David and Goliath military victories. She read about ancient battles where smaller, weaker forces had defeated superior enemies through cunning, desperation, and sheer audacity. Sarah found her there, surrounded by books about unconventional warfare and asymmetric tactics. "Studying the classics?" Sarah asked. "Looking for inspiration," Elena replied without looking up. "Throughout history, the underdog wins by changing the rules of the game." "And how do you plan to change the rules?" Elena looked up with the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from her in weeks. "By remembering that Marcus has never fought someone with nothing to lose." The night before the challenge, Elena sat on her bed holding Miguel's photograph. Tomorrow would determine whether she continued at the academy or returned home in disgrace. The weight of that reality pressed down on her like a physical force, making it hard to breathe. "I don't know if I can do this, Miguel," she whispered to the photograph. "Everyone expects me to fail. Maybe they're right. Maybe I should just accept that I'm not cut out for this life." She set the photograph on her nightstand and lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling where shadows danced in the dim light. "But I keep thinking about what you used to say, that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being terrified and doing what's right anyway." Elena closed her eyes, but sleep refused to come. Instead, she lay awake running through scenarios in her mind, preparing for the most important fight of her life. Tomorrow, she would face Marcus Cole in front of the entire academy. Tomorrow, she would prove once and for all
whether she belonged at Crimson Peak Military Academy. Outside her window, unnoticed in the darkness, 3 figures in black tactical gear scaled the academy's outer wall with professional efficiency. They moved like ghosts through the shadows, carrying equipment that didn't belong to any military the academy trained against: advanced surveillance gear, encrypted communications equipment, and weapons that were definitely not standard issue. The real test was coming, but it wasn't the one Elena was preparing for. While she focused on her personal battle with Marcus, a much larger threat was already inside the academy's walls, moving with deadly purpose toward an objective that would put every cadet and instructor in mortal danger. Elena Vasquez, the academy's worst cadet, was about to become its last hope. The next morning, the entire academy gathered in the main training arena to witness what everyone believed would be Elena's final humiliation. Marcus stood confidently in his combat gear, checking his equipment with the methodical precision of a seasoned professional. Elena appeared smaller than ever beside him, but there was something different in her eyes, a quiet determination that hadn't been there before. "Begin simulation," announced Captain Reeves. The arena transformed into an urban battlefield. Marcus moved exactly as Elena had predicted, textbook perfect, following established protocols. But Elena did something no one expected. She abandoned conventional tactics entirely, using the environment in ways that weren't in any manual. When Marcus anticipated her moves based on doctrine, she improvised. When he expected her to retreat, she advanced through impossible angles. For the first time in Academy history, Marcus Cole found himself adapting to someone else's strategy instead of imposing his own. Elena wasn't trying to outfight him. She was making him fight her battle on her terms.
The simulation reached its climax when both cadets were wounded and low on ammunition. Marcus, following protocol, moved to secure the high ground. Elena made a desperate gambit, using a controlled explosion to collapse part of the structure, trapping them both in close quarters where her improvisation skills gave her the advantage. When the simulation ended, Elena had achieved something impossible. Not victory, but a draw. The arena fell silent. Marcus Cole had never been stopped before. But before anyone could react, alarms began blaring throughout the academy. Real alarms. "All cadets to emergency stations," Commandant Morrison's voice echoed over the intercom. "This is not a drill. The academy is under attack." Through the arena's windows, Elena could see armed figures in black tactical gear moving across the courtyard. The mysterious lights she had seen in the valley, they hadn't been random. Someone had been surveilling the academy, planning this assault. "The armory," Elena shouted over the chaos, her mind instantly shifting to tactical reality. "They're heading for the weapons cache." While other cadets stood frozen in confusion, Elena was already moving. Her years of studying every inch of the academy's layout, every security protocol, suddenly mattered more than any test score. Marcus caught up with her in the corridor. "Vasquez, what's the plan?" For the first time, he was asking her to lead. Elena's mind raced through possibilities. The attackers were professionals, better equipped and trained than any cadet, but they didn't know the academy like she did. They didn't know about the maintenance tunnels, the hidden passages, the emergency protocols that only someone who had spent countless sleepless nights studying every detail would remember. "We split them up," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Rodriguez, take your team through the east wing. Williams, you're with me. We're going through the tunnels. Marcus, can you hold the main corridor?" For once, no one questioned her authority. What followed was the longest hour of Elena's life. Using guerrilla tactics she had studied but never practiced, she led small groups of cadets in hit-and-run attacks that confused and divided the invaders. She used her knowledge of the academy's blind spots and hidden routes to appear where the attackers least expected. When 2 of the infiltrators cornered a group of first-year cadets in the library, Elena emerged from a maintenance shaft behind them. When they tried to breach the armory, she had already moved the weapons to a secondary location using protocols most cadets didn't even know existed.
The tide turned when Elena realized the attackers' true objective wasn't the weapons, it was the Academy's communications center. They were trying to disable the base's ability to call for help while they stole classified training materials. Leading a desperate charge through the main building, Elena and her improvised team of misfits and former rivals fought their way to the communications center. In the final confrontation, it was Elena's willingness to take impossible risks, the same recklessness that had failed her in every training exercise, that allowed her to outflank the last group of attackers. When military police arrived 30 minutes later, they found the threat neutralized, and Elena Vasquez, the Academy's worst cadet, standing guard over captured infiltrators with a group of cadets who would follow her anywhere. Epilogue. 3 months later. Elena stood at attention as Commandant Morrison pinned the Medal of Valor to her uniform. The same mess hall that had witnessed her humiliation now erupted in thunderous applause. "Cadet Vasquez," Morrison said quietly, so only she could hear, "you've taught us all something important about the difference between being perfect and being effective." Elena smiled, thinking of Miguel. She had finally found her own way to honor his memory, not by being the perfect soldier he had been, but by being the leader only she could be. Marcus approached after the ceremony. "He owe you an apology and a recommendation letter. That is, if you still want to be an officer." Elena looked around at her fellow cadets. Rodriguez, Williams, Chen, Sarah, and even Marcus himself. They weren't looking at the Academy's worst cadet anymore. They were looking at someone they trusted, someone they would follow into battle. "I think I've found my calling," Elena replied. "Sometimes the worst cadet becomes the best leader, not despite their struggles, but because of them."